Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by my trusty sidekick, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
I'm doing well. So am I Robin or Batman? That's my question, dude.
Robin, definitely Robin. The the
I
the red
reject that.
the red Titans, unless you watch the Titans, though, which is a great DC series. And this is coming from a Marvel person, but we can get to that later. But joining us this week, we are so happy and glad to have with us Hemant Mehta. I, I
Yes.
had to say it slow just so that way I wouldn't butcher it.
You're good.
And he is a writer, speaker, content creator known for his work on atheism, religion, and politics. He's the author of "I Sold My Soul on eBay," which is really kind of interesting. I read the blurb for it. I'm going to ask you some questions about
Sure.
that. And the Young Atheist Survival Guide. He runs a very excellent Substack, which is the only Substack I actually pay for, and I read a lot of
Thank
Substacks.
you.
It's called the Friendly Atheist blog. Do you still have your podcast?
Yeah, I do. Same title, friendlyatheistpodcast.com for anyone interested in that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And you've
Awesome.
also appeared on all kinds of places, CNN, Fox News, other media outlets. This one is probably the one I bet most people point out the most. You're a Jeopardy champion.
It was a while ago, but yes,
That is
it was
amazing.
a random, very cool experience. And yeah, it was amazing.
Okay, so let's just start there real fast. So tell me about that. You're the first person I know that's ever won a Jeopardy.
It was straight up, they have, at the time, I think they do it a little differently now. This is in 2019, I believe. You could take a test a couple times a year. Just straight up, they would ask you questions online. You tried your best to answer them within the time limit, and then you never hear from them, is the assumption. And they wrote back at some point and said, "You did fine. Come in person to take a follow-up. We're going to be within like an hour of where you live."
Oh my gosh.
So basically,
Wow.
come in person for two reasons. Take another test, just so we can verify, you were not cheating on the first test. And second, we just want to see you in person. So literally, I'm in a hotel ballroom with like 100, 200 people who are in the same position. And we all took a test. They did some practice games with us. So you literally get like 2 minutes of time with other people doing something. And then they're like, all right, maybe we'll call you. Maybe we won't. Bye. Thanks for coming. And I thought that would be the end of it. And I thought it would just be a really cool story to tell some friends. And then, I don't know, a while later, they actually called and said, "Hey, you're going to be on the show on this date. If you can't make it, too bad. You're never going to be on it, right? Like, come on this
Yeah,
date
sure.
if you want to." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm there. Fine."
Uh-huh.
Dang.
And it was just an amazing experience. I mean, I spent they film like 5 episodes a day, like a week's worth of episodes in a day. So you're in a room with like 10 people, 11 people, and you don't know who's returning. You don't know if they're dominating for like months on end. And I was hoping maybe I won't like these people and then I'll really want to beat them.
Uh-huh.
And they were all really amazing and fun and smart. And of course they would be because they are there. And so you get to know all these people, and then you randomly are told seconds before they start taping, "Hey, you two, you're the ones that are going to face the returning champion on Tuesday's episode. So go get makeup done and then get out there in 2 minutes and let's go." And that was kind of it. And it worked out in my favor, the game that I played. I lost the next game that I played, but even if I had lost, I mean, worth the experience. That was so cool.
Wow. What was the like winning question?
That for the one I won,
Yeah.
I got it wrong. But the question, if I'm gonna butcher it now, of course. There's a place called Four Corners in Canada that has like these two provinces up here and these two down here. What are these two over here? And I got so stuck on the wording that I'm like, I don't even know what an educated guess here would look like. And I got tripped up, but luckily the way the betting went at the end, it just worked out in my favor.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was
What
very
the
cool
answer?
and totally random. Didn't expect it.
You know the answer now?
Yeah, now I'll never forget it. It was
Well,
Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
I know. I screwed
oh
up.
my
I screwed
gosh.
up.
That's amazing.
So like your Canadian subscribers, like do you notice that there's like, there's a deficit in those particular areas?
I know. There's no one from those provinces. They don't like me. No, I feel it's one of those things that, if anyone has, I'm at the point where I don't know if anyone's actually seen it or watched it or cares. So it's all good. It's a fun story. And given the sort of stuff we do where we talk about religion and politics, it's one of the few things I can tell people about where it doesn't matter what group I am in. I think everyone's reaction is, whoa, you got to do that? That sounds awesome. Tell us about that. And happy to do it if anyone asks. I'm not volunteering it otherwise. But everyone wants to, like, this was when Alex Trebek was still alive. They were all like, what is he like? They all want to know that. And that's a much better conversation to get along with people for than any of the stuff I write about. So,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I really love that. And I think that in itself is sort of like the secret, right? We can disagree about all kinds of stuff, but at the end of the day, we all think it's cool to talk to somebody that was on Jeopardy.
No, exactly. And there's very few things anymore, I feel, that are culturally relevant to so many people. Like, even if you don't watch the show, you know the show. You understand that. And it's a fun conversation starter, if nothing else.
Yeah, it really is. So I like to maybe talk about, some of those differences, especially as it applies to just your work and your writing. So you are a self-professed atheist.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about like your journey, because you weren't always an atheist.
No, I was raised in a religion called Jainism, a smaller Indian religion, Jain, Jainism. So they believe in nonviolence. They do believe in heaven and hell and karma and all that stuff, supernatural stuff. But primarily, what's the religion about? It's about not hurting other people. So philosophically, sounds great. Not a lot of baggage to go along with it, you know what I mean? But I think when I was about 14, 15 years old, I just started questioning that stuff like a lot of people do for the first time. Like, why do we believe this stuff and no one else understands what the hell I'm talking about? They don't know who these deities are, who these prophets are, whatever. And when I started exploring those questions, not talking to other people, because I wasn't even sure I should tell other people about that, but, searching online, late night dial-up AOL sort of, let me see what I could find online. What I realized pretty quickly is, it's not that my religion is wrong about this. It's that religion, period, is wrong about this. And while I didn't really I don't think I knew the word atheist at the time, that's essentially what I landed on, where it's like, everyone's wrong. And I feel very much like I am right about this thing. And after that, what happens is, okay, well, now I want to learn more about it. And you start doing that research, and I'm sure you can argue it's confirmation bias, whatever it is. But like, the more I read about it, the more sense it made. And I got lucky that it happened when I was like early in high school. So no one cares what I think about anything. I had the luxury and not social media to just explore this stuff by myself for years. And by the time I entered college, I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. And I'm really interested in meeting other people who feel this way, because I don't know how many of them are out there. I don't know how to connect with them. And so I spent, I feel like, a couple of years in college just trying to figure out, how do I meet other people who are like this? And once I found a community like that, it was incredible. It's like, wait a minute, you guys have been having the same thoughts I have? That's wild. There are conferences like for people like me. There are groups out there that exist to support people like me. That's fascinating. And that kind of got me on this journey of not just wanting to be an atheist, because who cares, but actually wanting to understand what it is these groups do. Because even if you go to, what's the most atheist group you can think of? I don't know, American Atheists or whatever. Even if you talk about what do they do, very little of it is trying to get people to be atheists. Like, a lot of what these groups do today is an extension of that. They push for church-state separation. They push for things like that, trying to help people who might have had religious harm. in their lives. It's like, oh, okay, there's something to actually do because of these beliefs. And I find that fascinating. And if you read anything I write about these days, you will know I spend virtually no time at all trying to tell people why they should be atheists, and all my time talking about, Christian nationalism or things that result from religious harm, or atheists when they do things I don't like either. So that's kind of where my focus has been since then.
Man, I really appreciate you sharing your story. I think it's always it's so interesting to me to try to understand someone's story and then to even try to understand the internal process, like what was going on, what was happening inside, because I feel like you can hear what people think, which is great, but I'm actually a lot more interested now in how people think, not necessarily what they think. I mean, I think what they think is very important,
Yeah.
no doubt, but I really like hearing how people think. And with that, what was that process like for you? Like even thinking about your family, what did they think of it? How did you work through that? How did you process the emotions of leaving something that you knew to something you didn't know? What was that journey like for you?
A lot of it is I didn't tell people about it for a while. So my family didn't know for a long while. But I think the biggest issue with it is I had been raised to believe, not directly so, but implicitly, that if you believe in God, that's the way you are a good person, right? You need God to be good. And trying to reconcile that with, wait, I don't think I believe in God. Oh, wait, what does that mean? And when I'm reading what other people have written about this stuff, it's, oh, wait, people who don't believe in the God I believed in, or the deities, or the supernatural stuff I believe in, they have the same beliefs about goodness. They act the same. They're good and they're bad, but it's not because of that. You have to rework the rationale for so many of the things that I accepted as true because of religion. And it's like, well, if you take religion out of it, how much of that is still accurate? And you realize some of that stuff falls away, but a lot of that stuff is probably still true, even if you take God out of the picture. And it's like, oh, but you have to refigure out all of this stuff. And that's what takes a while, especially, and again, it happened for me when I was young. But imagine you're like 30 or 40 and you've been steeped in religion your whole life. I've talked to pastors who have been in similar positions. Like, this isn't just a belief. This is my calling. This is what I believe I was raised to do. And if you suddenly start having doubts, think about what that means for a pastor or just someone who's spent their entire life thinking about this stuff. It's, wait a minute, I believed this and this and this. And if you take God out of that picture, how much of what I believed was built on any sort of solid foundation? Because it's very easy to, for example, if you believe in the Christian God, maybe you're in the culture that supports purity culture. And then what does that say about sex and marriage and all that stuff? Like, it's very easy to pile that stuff on. And if you remove God from the picture, it's like, well, then how come I didn't do this as a kid? What if I had tried this? What if this thing isn't actually a sin? There's so much you got to work through. I got lucky that it happened for me early on before all that stuff really came down. But again, it's a hard process. And at the time, keep in mind, I think it happened for me maybe 1997 or something. All those books about atheism that became really popular, the Dawkins era type of books, that was a decade later. So there just were not a lot of good mainstream resources for people who were doubting their religion unless you knew where to look for them. You know what I mean? And the internet was very early on too. So it was a lot of just trying to figure this stuff out on my own. I don't know how much of that, like if I go back in time, how much of that was accurate, how much of it was wrong, I have no idea at this point. But it was not easy only because there was so little information out there. Like, honestly, I joke about this, but I feel like the websites I saw at the time, it looked like just random crazy people writing from their parents' basements. But it seemed to make sense also. And that felt weird because I'm like, I don't know if I should trust this random crazy person, but they do make a good point.
It was the 90s, you know?
It was the 90s.
Like, people were doing all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
birth of grunge and all kinds of other cool stuff. But
Yes.
I love your story, and one of the reasons I think I connect so well with just what you do and kind of just your stories, because like I was not raised in the church. Like I grew up and consider myself an atheist for a while. I think I dabbled in Wiccan. But I was the guy that used to harass all the, like, not in hindsight, seems how messed up it is, like all these like Christian organizations on my college campus, like, and high school too, actually, like passing out stuff, like I was
Right.
that guy, to give them a hard time. And years later, much later, I married a pastor's kid. So my wife,
Yeah, there you go.
grew up in the church, you
Yeah.
know, and as I came to the faith. You could say that she converted me or kind of came with sort of the package or whatever, but however you want to describe it, like I'm in. I drink the Kool-Aid, right?
Right,
And
right.
but like it's weird. Like my experience as a Christian is way different than most of the other Christians I know that have grew up in it. They're like deconstructing, they're doing all this. I'm like, none of this makes sense what you guys are doing right now. Like, and then they're
And
just
it's
like, well,
interesting because a lot of
mhm.
the atheists who have written about this stuff and gotten famous for talking about it, I mean, I'm not necessarily, I'm not a fan of Richard Dawkins for a lot of reasons, but if his book is the most popular book about why you should be an atheist, The God Delusion, because it's written for such a wide audience, he has to be very superficial about how he describes religion. You just can't get that nuanced in a book that's designed to be everything for everyone. But one of the problems with what a lot of atheists do is that you're right, your Christianity, your version of it is going to be so different than everyone else's. Josh's is going to be different from everyone else's. And if you're trying to explain to them why they shouldn't believe this stuff, or you're trying to connect with them, it's going to be really hard for someone who is in that community, is a preacher's kid, is a pastor, what have you. It's going to be very easy to dismiss what someone like Richard Dawkins says. But I have found it really interesting because if you go on TikTok or YouTube now, odds are you would be able to find someone who was not raised in a Christian home, or did marry a preacher's kid, or was a pastor. And like they are talking about their experiences in a way that connects. Like I have done this at different events. I'll show them a picture of a really popular ex-Mormon podcaster, and it's like, how many of you know who this person is? I'm not even telling you this dude's name. And most of them have no clue, but the ex-Mormons in the crowd know exactly who it is. And then we play the same game. It's like, this dude is an ex-Jehovah's Witness with a really big following. Do you know who it is? Most people, the answer is no. But I have met ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm like, do you know who this person is? And they're like, yes, I do. I totally. Because they all find these people because they're looking for someone who understands what they've been through, and they can ease into those stories. And when you find someone who's not afraid to criticize the beliefs that you grew up with, and it's not just someone mad about religion. They're like, no, I remember when I was in this temple service and this happened, and this is the thought process I have as to why it's wrong. It's like, oh, you were there. You definitely know what you're talking about. And that's something a lot of the more famous atheists just don't have the capacity to talk about. But it's one of the reasons social media has been amazing for people, because you could find people who totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, so you mentioned Dawkins and definitions. I was wondering if maybe you can help define, or maybe the better question is, like, what definitions do you find helpful in helping you explain what it means to be an atheist?
I mean, for me, definition of atheist is I don't believe God exists. That's it. It's not a definitive thing. I can't prove it to you. It's, do you believe in another religion's God? Do you believe in like an ancient Greek God? Nope. And I don't live my life as if that person exists. And I feel the same way about all the gods people believe in today. Like, that's pretty much it. It doesn't get that much more complicated. if you want to get philosophical about it, I'm sure there's a better definition. I'm sure there's a more nuanced definition. But in terms of the way people actually talk, that's it. I just live my life as if God doesn't exist. I don't believe God exists, and that's about it.
You know what's interesting, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this too, is when I was an atheist, I would basically tell people the same thing. I'm like, there's no God, you know, like prove to me there's a God, you know, like,
right.
And then generally they would ask a follow-up question like, well, what do you think happens when you die? And I'm like, well, why are you connecting those two?
Yeah.
Because as an atheist, I'm like, they're not connected for me. Like me dying is a biological process,
right?
You know? Like everybody does it, you know. And if you connect to the God, you're purposely tying my belief in a God with my belief to an afterlife where they're disconnected for me. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts or take about that.
Religion offers answers, usually comforting answers to things we just cannot answer. And that's why, like, what are the biggest questions people have about that stuff? Why are we here? Where are we going to go? Like, I can't give you answers for those. I can tell you it won't be a comforting answer. But if you are religious, not only do you have answers to those questions, they make this really scary thing, your non-existence, seem really wonderful. Like, you will get to see everyone again. You will get to go to a place that's wonderful and lovely. And the details don't matter because every religion has their own version of that story. And it's like, yeah, I mean, if you lost someone close to you, sucks, traumatic. If you lost someone younger than you, a child or something, it's awful, worst thing in the world. If you're trying to figure out how to get through that, religion provides a very simple, very comforting way of dealing with it. I mean, that's why people want to know. That's why people ask those follow-up questions, because if you're taking away those really, I would argue, simple, made-up answers that are really comforting, like, what do you have? Reality is not comforting. But it's also, it doesn't bother me. I don't stay up at night thinking about it. It's just the way it is, kind of like you said. But a lot of people want that. I mean, they want that comfort. We can make a politics thing out of this too. People like being told that everything's going to be okay because they don't want to do the homework of figuring out how that's actually going to work. I mean, that's the story of everybody, right? Like, the people who actually look at this stuff and study it happen to know a lot more, and it's not always comforting. But there you go. And that's not to say people who are religious haven't ever thought through any of this stuff. They have. But I am saying for a lot of people, most people, I mean, I think I can say this. I don't want to speak for the two of you. You talk about this. You think about this stuff constantly. Most people don't. I mean, that's it. They don't. They don't have discussions about this stuff. Even in my own life. I mean, one of the reasons I do YouTube and podcasting, I mean, those are very much one-way sources of information. I don't take calls or anything like that. But outside of work, I don't talk about this stuff. If I'm out with friends or something, it doesn't come up. And it's not that my friends are not smart. It's just this is not a thing we ever really spend time discussing. And so, if I can provide any service with the stuff that I do, it's trying to explain, hey, there are some things you need to care about when it comes to this stuff, and let me try to explain it to you. And I hope people find that interesting. But again, that nuance, I don't even know what the question was anymore, but that nuance gets lost on a lot of people, I think, a lot.
That's right.
No worries, dude. That's, yeah, it's so, when we think about the afterlife, it's funny because the Bible doesn't tell you very much about the afterlife.
No.
If you actually look at it and you actually read it. It tells much about the afterlife, and the thing that we inherited is just not in there. It's some kind of tradition that got talked about, and then that got passed down. And the Bible has, it seems to me, has much more to do with how we live here than it does about where we go when we die. There's obviously this real big mystery to death that all of us are going to have to go to, and none of us have gone and for enough time and then come back. although I have heard stories, obviously I've never seen it, of people that are somehow resurrected. You know, you hear these stories and you're like, wow, you know, well, I'd have to see some pretty good evidence on that. Go ahead.
There were some stories. It's been a while since those books were really popular, but there was like some famous ones where a kid like died on the operating table, saw heaven, came back to life, and then as
heaven
that
is
kid
for
grows,
real. That's what that.
Right. And then that kid grows up, and it's like, yeah, that didn't happen at all. My parents kind of fed me the information.
They wanted me to know, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, getting into near-death experiences and stuff like that. And I was actually referring to just like more accounts from the missionary field and
right.
And
but
certain
this is one of those things, like
those
were stories I found fascinating when I was going through that journey away from religion. And the weird thing is now, I feel like even Christians that I pay attention to, because I'm curious what they're talking about, even pastors that I sometimes follow, never talk about any of that stuff because so many of them that I follow seem to have gotten more political than theological, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's all over the place now, and it's interesting to me because, you know, I try to imagine, I try to ask myself, you know, what would it take for me to become an atheist?
Yeah.
Like what would need to happen? What would I need to be convinced of? What would I need to like, and I don't necessarily have an answer to that question because so much of what we actually, you know and understand, at least from from my understanding of it, is these subconscious processes that we don't have a ton of control over where we land when it comes to a certain belief, or if we think this is the case, or like our beliefs. And oftentimes like we'll make things up in order to justify something, a belief that we didn't have. Like it's called confabulation. You can look it up in all these these psychological studies of people basically like making things up that were clearly not true in order to, because their brain was just like, we have to come up with a rational reason.
This is why I don't try to spend my time. I don't do debates, almost never, and I don't try to argue
Have you ever
theology.
done one?
A formal one, I don't. If I have, it's been a long time.
And you forgot about it, so it wasn't
honestly,
that impactful.
Yeah, like I've sometimes been asked to do it, and I'll just say no, unless it's a really cool venue or something that sounds amazing, maybe. But otherwise, it's just not something I focus. There are other atheist friends of mine who do it, and they're really good at it, and more power to them. I just never found that as interesting because, like you're saying, I don't think I'm gonna. If you and I, Josh, are doing a debate, I don't think anything I'm gonna say to you within the next 30, 45 minutes is going to magically change your mind.
Sure.
We're playing to the audience, whoever's watching that debate.
Absolutely.
And because it feels performative in that way, I just never found that personally appealing.
Yeah,
and even in private
understand
one-on-one conversations, I feel the same way. Like, if someone's emailing me a question about theology, I either don't respond to it or just...
delete.
Delete, yeah. Because I'm like, what... I'm not going to waste my time on this.
I'm not going to go in and do all that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Why am I doing your homework for you?
Yeah, even in a debate, it's like at the end of the debate, like there has to be a winner, there has to be a loser, and it's like that's not really how this process works. At least I wouldn't want to see it that way.
I did get invited to one, this is years ago, with William Lane Craig, who's famous for doing exactly those debates.
Oh yeah, I know William Lane Craig, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, this is not anything that is interesting to me whatsoever. If you need an atheist, I'm happy to point you to some, but no, not interested in this.
Dude, that's so funny that you got invited to a debate with William Lane Craig. I actually want to get him on the podcast. I don't know if he would do it or not.
I feel like I haven't heard his name mentioned in a really long time. I have no idea what that guy's up to.
Debating atheists, the things that he loves doing.
Yeah, but even in that capacity, I don't think I've seen his name mentioned very much.
No, that's probably true. Yeah. Have you ever heard of Joe Schmid, by the way?
That name does not
Majesty
ring a bell.
of Reason is the YouTube channel.
Okay.
Anyway, he's an agnostic. He went from, Christian to atheist to agnostic. He talks about in his story, and he is like, I've listened to him. He's fascinating. Joe, if you ever come across this, come on the podcast, dude. We want you. I'll probably reach out to you. But here, anyway, my question though is like, when you left all that behind,
Yeah.
you know, was there anything about it that you missed, or anything even now where you're like, man, I can look back from my perspective now and I can see that this was meaningful. I can appreciate this aspect of Jainism.
Sure. I think
and
this is not a new answer by any means, but there is something to be said about the importance of community and ritual and having something to look forward to. It is very hard these days to find anything where you are together with a group of strangers, acquaintances, whatever, and you are gathered together regularly for something you have in common. We're losing that a lot. Church is really good at building community. And again, my criticism that I spend time on is when that community is being harnessed to do something really horrible.
Yes.
But I mean, to that end, I mean, how many places outside of church do we actually get together with groups where we're not related? And these are not people you grew up with or something necessarily. That is a good thing. Community is a good thing. I mean, the better churches will take care of their members if they're going through rough times. If I'm going through a rough time, I mean, I hope I have friends who are there for me or family who's there for me, but like, if not, if I live somewhere far away, depending on what happens, like, there's no built-in community that's just going to pick up the pieces and help me out there. So good churches are really good at that. My problem is they use that power and leverage. I mean, now what happens if you start doubting the faith? What happens if you challenge what is being taught at the church? If they kick you out, if they don't want you part of their community, not only are you losing the religious aspect of it, as many atheists have said, you would be losing your social safety net.
Yes,
you might
definitely.
be losing, and then depending on how insular those churches are, you might be losing all of your friends, everyone you know, and you're totally left to your own devices, and that's a hard thing too. So there is some value in the community of it all, some value in saying, you know what, I have some free time and I'm going to use it to go hang out with these people. Maybe we're doing something as a group. Maybe we're volunteering. Maybe we're doing something, but like, it's hard to do that stuff on your own unless you're really forcing yourself to do it.
Yeah. I want to ask you about I sold my soul on eBay.
Yeah.
What's the idea behind that book?
That was right after college, I think. I imagine this. I'd been an atheist for a while, but I had not been a Christian. But now I was older. Now I had thought about this, read about it for a long time, and it's like, everyone I meet who is an atheist, and now I know a bunch of them, they're all ex-Christians. They're not even ex-name your denomination. It's all ex-mainstream Protestants or Catholics, what have you. And I've never been to an evangelical megachurch. I've never been to a Catholic church service for anything real. It's like, I can read about it, but that's very different than experiencing it firsthand. So long story short, this is at a time when eBay was popular. I just put up an ad saying, you can bid on where I go to church and I'll document it for you. I thought that was funny. And what I didn't realize is, oh no, there are people that actually want to send me to church because I'm an atheist. And a pastor ended up winning me for like over $500.
Nice.
And I'm like, oh no. And to his credit, he basically said, I owed him a year's worth of Sundays, basically. And he said, I don't want you to do that because I actually want you to like church. So he said, I will just I know where you live, Chicago-ish. I will send you a list of 10 churches to go to. I think he lived in Seattle at the time. He's like, I'll tell you where to go. We'll make it 10. Just go to 10 of these places. You go and you report back on his ministry's website where I could write whatever I wanted. And his goal, from his perspective, is, hey, here's an atheist going to a mainstream, seeker-friendly church service that is catered to non-religious people, and here's what an atheist thought about it. You didn't know he was coming. He was there. Here's what he said about it. And his goal is to take my criticisms and go to these pastors and say, hey, this dude showed up at your church and he hated it. What are you going to do to win over other atheists like him? Because you need to do better. That was his goal. But also, I've loved it because it was a great learning experience. I went to an evangelical church in the suburbs of Chicago, one of the biggest ones. I went to a black church on the south side of Chicago. Fascinating. I went to a Catholic service as well. I went to a dude's living room because he was starting his church and they didn't have a meeting place. So I got to experience a lot of that firsthand, and you realize what things are just stereotypes that I didn't know about. Like, my spectrum of what Christianity went from here to way out there. It's like, oh, there are some really crazy things, but also, wow, they're doing some amazing things for their community that I would not have known about. So all of that, after I was doing that, it got some media attention, and a publisher said, hey, after you're done writing for this dude's blog, which is what I was doing, can we send you to more churches and you'll do the same thing for us, but on a bigger scale, basically. And that book was I Sold My Soul on eBay, which is not what I actually did, but haha, you get the metaphor. And so when writing the book, I actually went to Ted Haggard's church in Colorado, which was a big deal at the time. I went to Joel Osteen's church in Houston. It was a good sociological experience. I'm glad I did it. I wouldn't do it again, but I'm glad I went. I mean, I encourage atheists to do that a lot too. I know there have been some college atheist groups that have actually tried to do things like that, where as a group, we're going to go visit a different type of church on a Sunday, and then during that week when we have our regular meetings, we're going to discuss what we saw. And that's like the launching point for a conversation. And, so there are some good things that came from that.
Wait,
that's cool.
Just real fast. It's almost like you were like an atheist secret shopper almost.
Yeah, you definitely were.
In a way.
I'm trying to imagine, because I planted a church. They're in my, they were meeting in my living room for 4 years.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily recommend that anymore. I used to say we're doing a house church network and all this stuff, and it's like it destroyed my house. And
it's hard.
It didn't really grow that much in the house, and then anyway.
What's interesting is the dude's house I went to, I'm actually still acquaintances with that guy, and it's fascinating because he's been pretty critical of the direction that church or that denomination and others like it have gone. And because of some of those experiences, I've gotten to meet Christians who are pushing back against a lot of the Christian nationalism stuff.
Well, you got two here on this podcast.
Right. So, I mean, there is some value in having to experience and getting to experience and talk to a lot of these people. I mean, at the time, the foreword to that book was written by a guy named Rob Bell, who was really popular at the time because he was pushing back against that narrative as well. And he essentially got, deemed an outcast from evangelical life because he challenged a lot of the stuff he didn't like in the church.
Right.
The difference is he was actually a really popular Christian. When I went to his church, what was interesting is I don't even think they had signs for the church. This was in Michigan. But you know how I knew that church was where I was at? It's because you saw all these teenagers walking into it, and that was weird. And that was the thing he was really good at, because he attracted young people and not like 80-year-olds like every other church. But again, that was one of those things where am I and what am I looking at? This is so different from the other places I went to. And again, that was a church where I walked in there, and even when I left, I'm like, I don't believe any of this stuff. But I could totally see why people are attracted to it. And I don't think I would have experienced that if I only ever listened to atheists.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. Because I was going to say, like, what kind of things did you see that you were like, I see why people believe this? But
I'll
on
give you
the
an
other
example
side
of that.
I'll give you an example. On the other side, real quick though, just on the other side.
No, go for it.
Give that example. Then I would love to hear what was the most negative experience, off-putting thing you saw as well.
The negative ones are predictable. They made it very much into right-wing politics. They were doing charismatic, let's pray, hands up in the air. It was creepy to me. That was the weird stuff. The one at the Rob Bell Church, because it attracted young students, what I liked about that one, for example, is whoever the pastor was, it wasn't him that day, they did a thing where they just held up the local newspaper which was a thing at the time, newspapers. And they said, you know what the headline is on the front page of this? Like, 25% of the people in our community are living below the poverty level. What are we doing as a church to fix this? And it wasn't a rhetorical question. They actually discussed that in their small groups later in the week, because they really did believe, and maybe not, maybe seriously, like they really did think, as a church, as big as we are, we have the power to do something about this. And what's the point of meeting every week if we're not addressing issues like this? I don't know whatever happened with that church, and the ones like it don't have the power that the other side does. But, I mean, when you see that, it's like, oh, here's a church directly addressing poverty. Here's a black church that is addressing local issues, political issues, but not in a MAGA sort of way. It's like, I need to be careful about how I attack church, because church isn't necessarily the enemy here. It's something different. I got to be nuanced with how I talk about that.
Yeah, you know, what's interesting, and I've said this in the show before, that when we started this podcast 5 years ago, and we were pretty ignorant, kind of about the intermingling of faith and politics. Like, we were very, very ignorant when we decided to call our podcast Faithful Politics. We just thought, hey, I like politics, he likes faith, you know, theology, like, let's call it Faithful Politics, you know. And then we started getting, like, you know, guest requests, like, for people to come on our show from, like, all different walks of life. And we're like, what kind of message are people getting? You know, just like, because we know they're not doing their research and looking at our website, you know, like.
So, oh my God, I get so many pitches from evangelical authors and their publishers. I'm like, I don't think you know what you're getting into.
Yeah. Exactly. You know, and since we've started or since we've grown, we've learned a lot, you know. And we can see patterns in a lot of the news stories that you push out on your Substack, and just watching kind of the tea leaves, you know, when there's like an excess of legislation, you know, to put Bibles or Ten Commandments in schools. Like, for me personally, I'm just like, oh, that's a Project Blitz thing, you know. So in my mind,
or Project 2025 thing, or whatever the newest iteration of it is.
Exactly, you know, like, so I'm curious if, like, out of all the stories you've done, like, what are some patterns or themes that you see sticking out from the religious groups?
I mean, again, it depends on which groups we are talking about, but one thing I have noticed over the past year is when these churches realize they have allies in government, their churches just become arms of the Republican Party. And they act like it. Like, God becomes a side character to Donald Trump. And they don't say that explicitly, but they act like it. And they cater their thinking. Like, I think if you took religion out of the picture and you just had people saying that, you would think you were at a political rally. If you took away the church setting, you would think you're at a political rally. That is happening. I mean, I watch videos of it. There are things that are unjustifiable when you put it in a religious context, but they have just added politics into the mix. And this is why they want to get rid of, they want to be able to endorse candidates from the pulpit. I mean, they can get away with it now, but theoretically the rule says they can't. But why do they want to do that? Because it would just make explicit what is only implied right now. And that's a disturbing trend, because even if you're a pastor, I would hope that you're thinking church should be a place where we can get away from politics and talk about something larger and more universal or whatever. And even I think a lot of pastors have said, I can't do that because my own congregation will, like, abandon me at this point. If I try to talk about the Sermon on the Mount, they're not interested. If I try to talk about why God wants Trump to do whatever Trump is doing, they'll stick around for it. And that's a disturbing trend as well. I mean, and so I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of Christians who get into government who think you need a good religious person in government. And what do they do when they're there? It's not helping the least of these. It's just pushing a symbolic measure of, like, superiority. Let's get the 10 Commandments on the walls while we lie about other stuff. while we hurt people who have nowhere else to go. Because
while we commit adultery.
While we commit adultery, right? Like, exactly. Like, they don't care about following this stuff. They just want the symbolic victory for their religion. And that's like if you look at the list of some of those legislators and what bills they've proposed, it's like a whole slew of religious advocacy and nothing to actually help people. It's like, if that's what you're doing, why are you here? Like, leave the job for people who actually want to do the work, because you clearly don't. And there's been so much of that. Like, I have to play triage every day when it comes to what story is worth my time covering, because, I mean, literally, I do keep track of state level bills that are being proposed and things like that. There are too many. I cannot write about all of them. So it's very much what's the most pressing issue today? What is not being covered that maybe I can add something to, because there are hundreds of these bills in all over the country.
Man. So I want to ask an obvious question, or maybe it seems like it's obvious the answer, but it's coming from a place like of real genuine curiosity. Like, so I know in our pluralistic society that we want people to have freedom to worship how they want, to not worship, to not believe whatever it is, which I am absolutely in favor of. I think that's really good. Sometimes I wonder if I'm in favor of it because of, I was born in the 20th century. Now I'm in the 21st century, right? I had just the American culture that I had, even though it was very, pro-Republican in a lot of ways growing up in the churches that I grew up in. There was also this sense like, hey, this is America. You worship how you want. Like, we're not going to put, like, Jesus is more important. Like, that's what was communicated to me. And now thinking about this, like, I would love for you to kind of articulate, like, why is it an issue for, like, in your mind, for pastors to get political or say, hey, we want this politician, or like by the same token, an imam who might come up and say, Donald Trump is, horrible, or we love Donald Trump, or, a rabbi or whatever. What is the issue that is the problem with people that have such deep convictions, see someone that could represent them or represent their deeply held beliefs and wanting to promote that? Like, yeah, so I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Few answers on that. I mean, one is, I think they're desperate right now. Every poll you can find shows that people are abandoning organized religion. Even if it slows down, it's not permanent. Like, it keeps dropping, right? And so the numbers are not there. Right now, a lot of these more conservative churches are reliant on a much older base. And so they're losing cultural power. They're losing any kind of power. And so they will do anything they can. They will attach themselves to a sinking ship, which is what they've done with Trump, because he gives them the power and legitimacy they can't earn on their own. So that's part of it. Why are you asking, like, why are they getting political?
No, like, why do you think it's an issue? Like, what is immoral or unethical or wrong about
hypocrisy? Something like that. I think maybe the biggest problem with it, because if they're saying we have to have a religious man in charge because we need a godly society because that's a good society. Look at the dude they're attaching themselves to. Arguably one of the most immoral person. You name the measure of that, right? Like, so do they actually care about the morality aspect of it? Clearly they don't, because whenever a Republican does something immoral, they find it an excuse to let it slide.
He also posted about being the king and posted a thing about a huge, but that golden statue. I'm
a
baffled.
false idol right in front of you. Yeah. Like, so they don't actually care about this stuff. And that's a problem for me. If they actually wanted to, again, if they think living under what the Bible says, living under those values is the best way to do it, we don't live in a theocracy. Make a secular case for why we should limit abortions, why we need to follow whatever rules you think are correct, and let's have a secular debate about whether you're right or wrong, because no one is telling a church, you can do this, you cannot do this. If you want members of your church to never have abortions, you go ahead and do that. As soon as you say, well, now none of you get to do that, that's where the personal liberties like come to an end now, right? Like, so that's where it goes from, these are your beliefs and I respect them, to what's happening now, which is, well, these are my beliefs, so you have to live under them. And now no one else except the ruling class gets to choose what the rules are. So everyone else loses their religious liberties. I mean, for example, when you have conservative Christians saying we need to ban abortion, some of the lawsuits trying to block that has come from like rabbis who say, well, my religion says I control my own body and you're getting in the way of that. And I mean, one, the courts should not be deciding which religious rules take precedent, but also what's happening right now is you have cultural Christians with a lot of political power who are using it to stifle everyone else's religious beliefs if they go against whatever they want. I mean, I also happen to think their ideas are just bad to begin with. But this is where the problem is. It's not that they say we have these beliefs and we think society would be better with them and that's why we want to implement them. It's that they are doing the exact opposite and then just lying to people about it. You know, we want to help everybody. That's why we're going to take away their health care. We want everyone to donate money. That's why we're going to blow up the economy to cater to Trump. If he wants to be king, who cares about democracy? Like, at what point do they just admit, okay, our religious values don't exist. We make those up as we go along. Because really, whatever Trump says, these religious leaders follow. They are not in the habit of saying, these are our Christian values. It's your job, Donald Trump, and the politicians we elect to do what we're saying, because that never happens. He'll pay them the lip service and then do whatever the hell he wants, and he gets no pushback from those people. So, to your point, why are they doing this? Because they want the political power and they don't actually care about their values. And so that is worth pushing back on, because none of these people are telling the truth about what they actually want. If a Democrat did the stuff Donald Trump was saying, they would find reasons to be against it. Like, they don't have principles when it comes to
that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my last question for you is, you said something at the very top, which resonated with me, and it's something I think I've heard different subgroups talk about. And what it was you had spoken about as you were kind of grown into sort of your newfound disbelief in God. There was like a transition period where it's just like, I don't really know, like, should I talk about it? Should I not talk about it? And we've spoken to a number of folks from the LGBTQ community, and when I talk to them about coming out, I've been rightly corrected by saying it's not a one day thing. It's like, it's a process, so when people come out of the closet, it's like that door is opening very slowly, and you may have already opened it up a lot to this person or that person, but for everybody else, it's, and I'd love for you to maybe give some advice or some commentary about folks that are kind of in your same shoes or were, or when you were in those shoes, basically like, hey, I've been raised in a church. My father, his father's father, were pastors of a church, and I just don't believe anymore. like what would you tell that person?
I mean, look, there are resources online for people who have those doubts. I would say YouTube and TikTok do a better job of giving you answers than a lot of the books that are out there, and a lot of the old website stuff that's out there as well. But I think the biggest thing to realize is there's no date by which you need to have an answer, and you don't have to do this publicly. I think there's value in, if you're interested and you are questioning your faith or what have you, like, go read stuff, go watch stuff from people whose perspectives you might disagree with or you're not sure about. Watch responses to those as well. because there's, depending on the subject, there's a lot of responses as well. And I hate using this phrase because I hate this phrase, but do your own research. But like, go listen to a bunch of people, because no one's saying you have to figure this all out within a week or a month. There is no time limit. And if you care about this, I think that's powerful. That means it means you care. Most people are apathetic about everything. So like, good for you for exploring. Go read a Christian apologist. Go read what atheists have to say about this stuff, or listen to what they're saying wherever they are saying it. But get as much information as you can. You try to make sense of it. And again, if you're looking for resources from people who left your specific faith group, I promise you those resources are out there at this point. There are more generic ones too. If you do, like, is there a group for people who left religion, left Islam, left evangelical? I mean, it's all out there. You can find it if you just do a basic search for it. But also, you don't have to do this publicly. You don't have to put your thoughts out there. Though, by the way, if you do, I'm sure you'll find an audience as well, because a lot of people are on the same journey. So it's whatever's comfortable for whoever's listening. If you have doubts, if you have questions, take your time. Go figure it out. Like, no one's pressing you to have an answer for this stuff. This is a lifelong journey for a lot of people. And it's good that you're asking these questions. And, I mean, whenever I try to make articles about the things I'm writing about, it's not like I go in saying, who's my audience for this? But I do try to think, I am not speaking to atheists. I'm trying to convince anyone who's reading, here's why this is a problem, here's why I'm right about it, and here's what the issue is. And I am hoping that with pretty much everything I write, that if a Christian reads what I say, they would walk away from it saying, yeah, he has a point. And I think there is value to that, and I have found that to be the case for a lot of the content creators who talk about religion as well, where they know their audience is not just people like them, but they're trying to explain it in a way that makes sense to them. And they're saying, if it makes sense to me this way, maybe it'll make sense to you. And I'll show you my thought process, and I'll show you the homework I did to figure it out. And I think that's why some of them are really good at it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny because as you're talking, I definitely resonate with what you're saying. I mean, one, the idea that we want to try to increase and have as many true beliefs as we possibly can.
Right.
And have as few false beliefs as we possibly can. And I think that that's something that any Christian, any atheist, any person should be able to say without reservation. I want to know what's true. Now,
right.
Can we know that? I get that those are different questions.
And being willing to challenge your preconceived notions about
No
what
doubt.
is true is not a thing a lot of people want to do.
It's very hard.
It's
very
so
hard.
much better when you have a confident person, usually a guy, usually white, doesn't matter what religion or atheism thing we are talking about, but it does help when you have a very confident person who can just say, this is what's true, I'm going to tell you why, this is the answer. That is what a lot of churches are. That is what a lot of conservative commentary is. It's some dude saying, I know what's right, you don't have to think, I've done it for you, and just putting it out there. And it's so much easier to just say, well, yeah, I guess that person has a point, because they know how to deliver that stuff. They're not doing a nuanced dive into it. Like, one of the things that's frustrating to me is, like, conservative commentators, not politically conservative, I just mean in general, conservative commentators lack nuance, and they are absolutely certain of everything they say, whereas the more liberal, progressive types I know are the ones like, well, I'm not absolutely certain about this. Here's some more nuance to this issue. Even if you watch like John Oliver doing a deep dive into some subject, it's very much, here's what we know, here's my citations, but also here's the problem with that. And usually the answer is, I don't know how we solve this. Whereas if you watch some conservative commentator talk about any issue, there's no nuance, there's no citations done, or very one cursory page one of Google, this is what I found, and just this is the answer, this is what we got to do. It's how Trump issues all of his policies. I know everything, just let me do it. It's how Elon Musk operates as well. And the problem is those things don't actually work. But so not to get off too much of a tangent, when you have people who are saying, I'm willing to explore my own beliefs, whatever they are, that's a good thing. We should encourage that. And as I've said to other people, I don't care if you listen to me. I don't need you to listen to other atheists. I want you to explore it. And I don't care what your end result is. If you end up not becoming an atheist, I am not losing sleep over this because I am not trying to earn a tally mark on the wall of someone I've converted, right? Like, but that is a different vibe than a lot of pastors, conservative pastors in general, where conversion is very much a goal. It's not for me, speaking for myself. But again, this is the thing. If anyone is willing to question their beliefs, that's a good thing no matter where you end up. And I wish we would encourage more of that. And you don't need to do it in public. And there's so many resources out there. And the more you take in, I think the better off you're going to be in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you on that. And I do want people to come to know Jesus personally. That's a personal conviction of mine for a lot of different reasons. But at the same time, I have very little, next to zero control on that. So my bigger like concern is honestly a lot around what you're talking about. Are people willing to enter into these things? Are they willing to ask hard questions? Are they willing to pursue some of these things? Are they willing to embrace their doubts, have conversations? Because at the end of the day, like you said, they're going to wind up somewhere. They're going to wind up, and who knows where that's going to be? Who knows where you'll be in 30 years? Go ahead.
And I will also say that not respect is the wrong word, but I do kind of have a soft spot for like Christian apologists who are just very much, I want you to believe in this stuff. I have done a lot of this homework and thinking, and I want to convey that to you. And I think they are wrong. But part of me is like, you know what? Good for you for caring about this so much that you want to convince people you're right. I have less of a problem with that and much more of a problem with people who clearly do not do the research, do not think about this stuff, but are absolutely convinced they have the answer and also want to convert you. Like, that bugs me. When they get political about it, that bugs me. But if they're straight up, and I've met these people because we've maybe done events like this together, where it's like, oh, what's your deal? Oh, you are a Christian apologist who just very much thinks this and this about Jesus. Like, I think you're wrong. But at the same time, I mean, there are people I've met in those positions where maybe we have an event where we're doing a discussion, not a debate, but a discussion together.
Sure.
And because I know those people, and I think they begrudgingly respect me in that way too, like maybe before the event or afterwards, we'll go get lunch or drinks beforehand just to catch up, because there is, and I'm not suggesting, yay, they're wonderful and right, even though they believe these things I find really horrible. It's more like you are passionate about this thing and you want to convince people you're right, but you're open to listening and you've thought about this. Good for you. I wish more people would do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you on that. Man, Hemant, it's been... Did I say that right? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did. Thank you guys so much. This was fun to talk about.
I really appreciate you coming on the program with us today. It's been a real pleasure having you.
Sure. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And to our audience, guys, we want you to go check out the Substack. Check out the book, The Young Atheist Survival Guide, Sold My Soul on eBay. And give me the podcast from The Friendly Atheist. You want to check out the Substack?
Friendlyatheist.com is the website. It's free if anyone's interested. That's where I do most of my work.
That's great. And we will put links to that. And again, we appreciate you coming on. And to our viewers and listeners, thanks so much for joining us, guys. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all the stuff that hacks the algorithm that we can get this out there. And until you next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. Have a great one.
See ya.